Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar, Counting on Funding, How to Get Census Dollars. I'm Dorothy Johnson, Legislative Representative for Government Finance and Administration here at CSAC. I'm joined today by Justyn Howard, Deputy Secretary for Census at the California Government Operations Agency, and Ditas Katague, Director of California Complete Count Census 2020.
Well, thank you, Dorothy and CSAC, for hosting this webinar because counties are really a critical part of this massive outreach campaign that we're going to be undertaking to ensure that all Californians are counted in Census 2020. So to that end, the governor and the legislature have put an unprecedented investment into this outreach campaign. No other state has invested over $100 million for this campaign. First of all, in 2017 and 2018, $10 million was set aside for LUCA, which is Local Update of Census Addresses, which was given out to counties to assist them in their efforts to ensure that all the addresses that the US Census Bureau uses are updated so that people can actually get and receive an invitation to respond to the census. In 2018 and 2019, $90.3 million was allocated for statewide outreach, and we think that's a huge investment. And to that end, we are focusing on both a ground game and an air game, and counties will be integral to that part. So let's talk about the distribution timeline. We put a lot of effort into this, and last week, so this webinar is very timely, we released the state's funding allocation plan, and really first out of the blocks are the counties, because they received their statement of work and their funding allocation. So that happened on November 9th, and we're giving till approximately January 31st to respond back. Counties will have the opportunity to opt in or opt out and fill out their statement of work, which will include a strategic plan to do that. On November 30th, we're also distributing tribal grant funding letters to help tribes throughout California reach out to their tribal members. And then on the December 14th, there's going to be two separate RFPs, requests for proposals, that will really handle our community-based organization outreach. Those are really the trusted messengers that we'll be using to help get the state covered. So we are basically, in fact, trying to blanket the coverage of outreach throughout the state through these methods of counties, tribal governments, and community-based organizations who are trusted messengers on the ground. Justyn, why don't you talk to us about the overall allocation?
Sure, thank you. So what you're looking at here is basically a pie chart that kind of just graphically displays how the state is approaching funding related to the upcoming decennial census. You can see that approximately 33% of it is being dedicated to outreach within our local government partners. That includes the counties, as well as our tribal government friends as well. We have another 33% of it going to our community-based organization partners out there. And those two combined make up about 2/3 of all the funding that the state is going to provide to what Ditas referred to as the ground game. Aside from the ground game, you can see the other components of our efforts as well. The state is doing our best to limit our administrative costs to no more than 10%. So 10% of the funding is going to administrative costs at the state level. After that, we are dedicating approximately 20% of the funding to our air game, which is going to be our over-the-air media campaign. Coming in late in the first week in January, we'll be releasing another request for proposal specifically related to our media efforts. On top of that, we are looking to do providing a little bit of funding for our state agency outreach. What we're looking to do there is to fund certain activities within state government to where we have identified all the various touch points that state departments have with the citizens of California. And we'll be looking to set up things such as kiosks within DMV locations or EDD locations to help people fill out their census forms. And then finally, we've provided some money related to schools and school outreach. $1 million is dedicated towards that. That'll be coupled, we'll be looking to target Title I and Title III schools with some of this funding. In addition to our pilot program that we have established, where we're going to be doing education in various grade levels related to the census. And then finally, we've set aside $1 million for what we call our contingency and emergency area. And this is really for, as the census gets underway in April 2020, and as we see things unfold on the ground, we'll be able to quickly move this money into areas where we see gaps developing upcoming or where we see additional resources are needed. For instance, let's say a particular community or a particular county the response rates coming in are lower than what we had otherwise anticipated. We may dedicate additional resources so we can do further outreach in those areas. So that's what the contingency funding is for. We are continuing to do our California Complete Count Committee at the state level. Our next meeting is on December 3rd, and that is being funded out of our administrative budget funds. So what you're seeing here is basically the contract amounts that are available for all the counties within California. What we have done is we have first set up county minimums. We look to establish these minimums in order to ensure that every county has an opportunity to participate in outreach. The minimums are based on population, the total number of population within the county. And the minimums range from anywhere from 100,000 all the way down to 25,000 depending on your population size. Anything above that funding was allocated based on your hard to count population. So I want to make this very clear to everyone is that everything we are doing is based on data. And it's really based on the data of the hard to count or those who are least likely to participate in the upcoming census. And so what we've done is if that county's share of the hard to count population is 10%, then ideally 10% of the funding would go to that county to provide provide outreach services. And so after doing all these calculations, we have a total of $26.6 million that'll be going to counties. We hope that every county does choose to participate in this critical effort for the state of California. Funding not only for the state, but as well as the counties and the cities are at stake from the federal government and ensuring a successful count. I will note that should a county not be able to participate for whatever reason, we do have contingencies in place to ensure that we will be able to dedicate the resources as you see identified on your screen to that county. Meaning if you don't accept or opt into this program, we will look to then find a city who has the administrative capabilities to conduct outreach within that county who would be willing to do that. And if that city cannot perform that function, we'll look to a council of government, whoever your regional COG is, to see if they will step up. At the end of the day, should a council of government not be able to participate, we will ultimately provide your funding, as you see on your screen, to a community-based organization, and that community-based organization will be directed to provide outreach within your community.
But I think a county, a good question is, can the funding be used to hire a contractor to lead local outreach? And yes, absolutely, they can. There will be a number, and maybe we'll address it a little bit later in terms of what the scope of work that is required by the counties in order to get their funding. We'll cover that a little bit later.
Great.
Okay. Our efforts are really about reaching California's hardest to reach, hardest to count. Sometimes they're called hard to survey, hard to reach, least likely to respond. That's where we're prioritizing our dollars, and we want all the folks that we contract with, whether you're a tribal government or a county government or a community-based organization, to focus on that. The priority populations include Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Native Americans in tribal areas, Middle Eastern North Africans, immigrants and refugees, farm workers, people with disabilities, areas with low broadband subscription rates or no access to broadband. This is sort of a new area or new kind of target area that we focused on since 2010, because many of you may not know, but in 2020, the US Census Bureau is moving to an online survey tool to actually enumerate. And so 80% of the population will get a postcard to answer online. So this is a huge difference to what has been done in the past, and we understand in California that there are many areas that have reduced or not great access to broadband, but we also understand, different than what the federal government is looking at and who they're going to send a postcard or a form to, that there's broadband subscription rates, which is there can be access to broadband, but people may not be able to afford it. So we're also looking at that. That was taken into account in our formulas. So I think that's something important for the counties to look at, is who in their areas may not have access to online, and then what can you do to mitigate that or provide opportunities, whether it's in county buildings or partnering with other schools to provide access to online services. Homeless individuals, families with non-conventional housing, again, you'll probably get a postcard by the address, but many people are doubling up in housing, and they may not know that they have to answer for everyone in the household. That is probably the easiest way to get an undercount or to miss people, is that people don't understand that you have to answer for the entire residence. So veterans, senior or older adults, Children 0 to 5 have been historically undercounted for the last 3 decades. Households with limited English proficiency. And then we are also going to provide technical assistance for our statewide outreach and rapid deployment portal. That's something new this time that we're doing. I did this in 2000 and 2010 for both governors. And what we found is the coordination piece, the role of the state to really coordinate the efforts that are out there is very critical. And so using technology, including geographic information system and really mapping, is a great way to make sure that this massive state is coordinating all the efforts. We're going to avoid duplication, and we're going to identify gaps geographically as well as population-wise of folks who may not be responding. And as we fast forward to April 2020, when the count begins, not unlike what we looked at last Tuesday, where you could see precincts come in, because the count is held over 12 to 16 weeks. The US Census Bureau is going to send us a feed, hopefully daily, down to the census block group level, so you can see just how your counties are doing in terms of response and redeploy outreach efforts to those areas that might be lagging. So we think that's the SWORD technology, GIS technology, and sort of immediate feedback is an excellent addition to really help us get the count out and to make sure that everyone is counted.
So complementing our county efforts is the Census Office has divided the state up into 10 regions, and these regions are established for our community-based organization partners out there, or even foundations who may want to participate in our outreach efforts. And you can see a map on your screen of those 10 regions. What we did is we grouped the regions together geographically. All the counties are within a region contiguously. No one is divided between a region. We've done it based upon our own workload efforts. We've based it upon similarities between the counties and some like-mindedness thinking between those counties. What we plan to do, as Ditas had mentioned earlier, is we'll be coming out with an RFP in mid-December, and we'll be hoping that our community-based organizations and or foundations will put in bids to provide outreach within each of these regions. So this kind of shows you how much money is going to these regions for which our community-based organizations will be bidding on. I want to point out that if you look at the green piece of the pie up there for the statewide CBOs, in addition to our regional efforts with our community-based organizations, we'll also be targeting some statewide groups. And many of those statewide contracts that we'll be targeting are for the previously mentioned hard-to-count groups that Ditas was talking about. We have our own regional program managers, and each of our regional program managers will be overseeing these various regions as well as the county. So every county will be assigned a particular region program manager that they get to work with.
So if you think about the counties, of course, are geographically sort of their jurisdictions, and then we have these community-based organizations, and we develop these regions also geographically. But the statewide money that's set aside is really based demographically on population. So we're trying to really cross-hatch and weave and make sure we're having coverage, and then also collaborating and working together to make sure that we don't have any gaps.
Right. And it's important to note is that spending on outreach within each county, within each city, is coming from multiple directions. So it's not just what's going to the county at the end of the day. There will be additional spending coming from your community-based partners. And some of those may be the exact same community-based partners that the counties choose to flow their own money through to. So you'll be having funding spent on outreach within your communities from multiple sources, including at the end of the day when we come out with our media proposal, we'll be blanketing the state as much as possible with local ethnic media. And so you'll get more spending on outreach within your community from that as well.
Yeah, so the media really provides that surround sound that supports that ground game.
That's great.
So here's the timeline for our different efforts. I know it's really small. I think it's both on our website as well as with the attachments for the webinar. But at this point, I think we wanted to open up to questions.
Great. Thank you both so much. That's really informative, and I know a lot of information. And we have received a few questions in advance of this webinar that I want to address first before we turn over to the participants online all over California. So one of the questions is, can a county contract with another county to help reduce or alleviate some of the administrative costs and pool their resources?
So sure, I'll take this question, and thank you for that question. Yes, we strongly encourage counties to work together and partner and collaborate together. If one county wants to contract with another county in order for that county, who may be better served from an administrative standpoint, to provide such services or even just the oversight that's needed, they can absolutely do that. Our goal at the end of the day is to ensure that every county is participating. We want to make sure that we're doing outreach in each county throughout the state of California, and we're not going to put in place barriers that would prohibit that. So at the end of the day, if it's best if those two counties want to partner and they feel it's best, by all means, just let us know at the state level. That way we can do on our end what is necessary to help facilitate that effort.
Great.
Yeah.
Another question we got is, if for any reason a county is unable to meet the 90-day deadline to submit their request to opt in, what considerations will be given? Again, we have a number of counties that are dealing with major natural disasters or may have different board meeting schedules, and so hoping we can find out what extensions are available.
Well, I think we'll take it on a case-by-case basis. We certainly understand what's going on out there in the field. And again, our goal is just to make sure that you guys have the resources. So I think they shouldn't worry about that, and because we will work with them.
Great. And we've talked about having a really strong ground game, and I'm hoping Justyn or Ditas, either of you could address why the census is so important for California as a state.
Sure. So really, it comes down to two things, and I always like to say, just make it simple, because people are like, oh, census is so boring, you're counting people. It's about power and it's about money. One, the power is all about how in the Constitution we reapportion our 435 seats based upon population count. So no one wants to lose their voice in Washington, D.C., and we certainly don't want to lose a congressional seat to a state like Texas or North Carolina, because that's exactly what could happen if we don't get a complete and accurate count all throughout our state. The second thing is it's about money. So the money really has to do, it's approximately $1,900 per Californian per year over a decade if you're missed. And that's because it goes to schools, it goes to roads, it goes to healthcare. All the federal programs are funded, not all, many federal programs are funded based upon the census count. I like to tell people, what do you do on April 15th every year?
Pay taxes.
Pay taxes, right? So it's this kind of huge sucking sound of your dollars being electronically transferred over to DC. And that's every single April 15th. But only once a decade on April 1st do you have the opportunity, do you have the right to demand that back by being counted. Because that's how the federal government knows that we're here, and that's how dollars, formulaically get distributed back.
Great. And another thing about sort of the role and the responsibilities, one of the questions we receive all the time is, what are counties mandated to do either in state statute or by federal law when it comes to the census?
You want to take that one, Justyn?
My understanding is there's no mandate for them to do anything. So this is a completely voluntary program. For the reasons aforementioned by Ditas, we want you to participate because we don't want to lose congressional representation. We want to maximize the federal dollars coming back to the state as well as the counties and the cities. To the extent they don't voluntarily participate, we are putting all of that at risk, and we're risking that going elsewhere in the country. California in general is always a donor state to the federal government, and we want to ensure that we get our fair share of funding. So it's imperative that while this isn't mandatory, we strongly encourage everyone to participate. And we think most will understand that, and that they will choose to participate for that reason.
Right. I think we saw that almost $11 billion goes directly to county programs and services, whether it's health and human services, transportation, criminal justice, senior programs, economic development. It touches every part of what counties do and the way that we serve Californians. And that's why it's so critically important that we all engage and get involved at this early stage of the education, motivate people, and then we're ready to activate when the enumerators actually go out into the field.
That's correct.
So we have a good amount of time left, and what we'd love to do now is go through the questions that you all have submitted. We will be developing an FAQ to help guide you through not only this initial phase, but the additional steps as we move towards the April 2020 date. So we'll start with the first question. I think that Ditas mentioned, but we'll go back to that. How a county can use funding to hire a contractor to lead local outreach and the complete count committees on behalf of the counties and the cities.
So I'll take that.
Okay, great.
Sure. Absolutely. Counties County funding can be used to hire an outsource to a contractor or their own CBO organization. In fact, we encourage the counties to work with their local CBOs that they know quite well, and many of them will be well suited for this type of effort. So that is definitely one approach that you could take as a county. You are not precluded from doing that in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, great. And then we did receive a question about who received the information about the contracting and opting in. That was sent directly from GovOps to all of our CAOs. CSAC also redistributed that information to anyone who is part of our County Census Project Lead Group, as well as redistribute to our CAOs and also the CSAC Board of Directors. The next question coming in is how a county can advocate for a particular organization to receive a greater allocation.
Does that mean a organization on the ground, or?
I'm
Maybe
guessing
I'll
a CBO.
maybe
or-
I'll answer it this way: one is we're expecting a very competitive process for our RFP that is out there. We are anticipating, just based on the RFI that we had put out earlier in the year, a high number of responses for our regions as well as our statewide dollars. We always encourage you at the county level. We would encourage all of you, if you know of an organization that does fantastic work and you think they would be well suited for what we're trying to do, encourage them to participate by submitting their proposal that fits within our timelines. Everyone will be treated equally in terms of us grading those responses as they come in based on set criteria.
So I don't think they can advocate necessarily, but they can certainly advise them. We want to make sure that these responses cover geographically and demographically the hardest to count areas. So knowing the hard to count and knowing the partners that are on the ground will certainly make a very strong response.
Okay, great. The next question coming is, can counties include narrative on a specific CBO in the county strategic plan or resolution to show the ongoing partnership that they've had, perhaps to make case that they should be a recipient of some of the funds?
They can absolutely include that in the strategic plan. It probably would show us that you've already done a lot of homework out there. I don't know criteria-wise how that may be weighted, but we'd love to see what everybody's doing out there.
Okay, great. And then we have a question about the 10% administration costs associated with the counties. And the question is if they can clarify that the administrative cost to manage and administer the complete count committees is not just limited to 10%. I think the question is, again, are admin costs for counties limited at 10%, or if there's another funding mechanism should administrative costs exceed the 10%?
So similar to the state where we are keeping our administrative costs down to 10%, the counties will be required to keep their administrative costs down to 10%. And what we'll do is we'll develop a formal FAQ related to what we consider and define what administrative cost is. We do recognize that there is a difference between administrative costs and program costs are not included within that 10%. So if the county is hiring people to do program and outreach directly, that is not necessarily an administrative cost that would be subject to that 10%, but we will put out an FAQ with more certainty on that in the very near future.
Okay, great. Moving on to our next questions from the field. If a county does choose to opt in, roughly due in its end of January, I believe. I believe those resources are all provided online at the California Census website. And also all the materials are again attached as part of this webinar as one of the resources. Again, we will also be creating an FAQ to help guide counties through that process. The next question coming in I want to address is maybe expanding a little more on the use of GIS in the SWORD system and how that could integrate with the statewide GIS efforts.
So almost every county has licenses for the Esri platform that we're using that SWORD is on, I believe so. And most of them also have a GIS resource that can do that. Basically, many of the counties that we've worked with are able to map out where their resources are, whether they have county buildings, whether they have broadband to them, and being able to identify the resources that are on the ground that can be leveraged with both the community-based organizations, with schools, and with the local complete count effort. So it's really about knowing your resources and then overlaying where the hard to count folks are, right? Because you don't want to be doing outreach in an area where no one's going to show up. So it's, again, sort of place-based. The US Census, the decennial census, is a place-based enumeration. So that's why GIS is very important.
Okay, great. Another question we have coming in is whether or not counties are required to contract with the cities as part of their strategic plan.
Do you want a requirement
So
suggested?
I would say this, as part of our overall allocation package, the state has also provided this percentage of hard to count populations that actually reside within the city limits versus the unincorporated areas of the counties. The counties, we expect at the state level that the counties help serve as a fiscal agent also for those cities by passing through that money to some of those cities that want to participate. Not every city is going to want to participate, but as you form your local complete count committee, you are encouraged to have participation from your cities. We expect that these dollars will be spent within those city limits as well, given that is where the hard to count and the least likely to participate population resides, is the bulk of them will likely be within these cities. So yes, you must work with your cities and you must collaborate and coordinate those efforts. Whether or not that means the funding flows directly to them, that is part of the collaboration effort that you need to talk about with at the local level. But we do expect those dollars to be spent in the cities where the hard to count populations reside.
Great. We have another question coming in about accountability and wondering what accountability measures will be there for counties that choose to opt in and receive state funds.
So in terms of accountability and how you get your dollars, it is a contract, so it is deliverables based. We do want to see a pretty comprehensive strategic plan, and I know in the scope of work it really laid out what we'll be looking at to ensure that you're considering everything needed on the ground. Accountability will be tracking those dollars. Payments will be made based upon those deliverables. Shortly at the end of, I'd say, third quarter of 2019. One of your deliverables is an implementation plan, and that's really about laying out the actual outreach you'll be doing from January to July of 2020. So in terms of accountability, you have to have these deliverables. Our regional program managers will be looking at them, making sure that you're collaborating with the area administrative community-based organizations, ensuring that you are identifying gaps with those groups and collaborating, and that you have a good plan to really reach out to those that are least likely to respond. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the US Census Bureau is really the folks that are doing the enumeration, and we'll get to see those results and then react quickly about those results. We want to see a complete and accurate count, of course, and response rates will be an early indicator of how we're doing on the ground.
Great. Another question coming in is if CSAC can provide a list of programs whose funding are directly linked to the census count. And yes, we're actually developing a series of fact sheets broken down by policy area, health and human services, transportation, criminal justice, economic development, and other areas that will have a list of programs that are impacted as well as what dollars are on the table. We're also reaching out to CSAC affiliates who serve all of our county residents to ensure that they have those resources as well, because they will serve as touch points with the residents most locally in the community. So those are in the works, and we hope to have them out soon for you all. So when deciding the county funding amounts, why was local investment by county governments not considered? So perhaps a question there about matching funds or previous dollars already spent by the county.
Well, I'll say this. We definitely encourage all counties to participate by providing additional resources of their own. Everyone has funding at stake here, the counties, the cities. The state, while providing $90 million, it's a big state, and that $90 million only goes so far. We fully expect everyone from other government partners, as well as our foundations, will all be contributing additional resources towards this effort. Again, we are not mandating people to participate, therefore we are not requiring matching funding per se, but it would behoove every county to contribute some of their own funding towards this effort as well.
Whether it's in kind in terms of staffing, or there's actual funding of media dollars or other work that they're doing.
Okay, great. Another question that I think came up and was mentioned earlier comes down to English language proficiency. And can you say a little bit more about how the federal government is rolling out their census program this year that's maybe different, that would really impact those populations?
Okay. So the language program at the US Census Bureau is covering approximately their top 20 languages, which don't really correspond with California's top 20 languages. The form, as we mentioned, will be online, and it will be in 12 languages. However, if you want want a paper form, it'll only be available in 2 languages, and that's English and Spanish. So online 12 languages, not necessarily corresponding with our 12 languages that California needs, and then only 2 languages for the paper form. So in terms of limited English proficiency, and we have some mapping detail and some data on that, we know that those folks kind of combined with other factors, including whether they're like renters or they're in complex households or urban areas or what have you, will be least likely to respond. But we and the counties and the rest of our partners are going to really have to consider languages in order to approach those residents in their language, hoping that you'll engage with people who are culturally competent and linguistically competent to assist those folks in their language to feel most comfortable to respond.
Okay, great. Another question coming in is whether or not example strategic plans will be available for counties to look at as they're developing their own plans.
As we get plans developed, we plan on sharing as much information as possible, including examples of strategic plans and implementation plans as they come out. We will post data and information that we have from previous years to help inform people's decisions. At the state level, our goal is going to be to provide as much information as possible to all our partners. We're going to be in high data sharing mode, and we're going to be working hand in hand with everyone through our regional program managers to help them develop their plans. So if you're worried about how to develop your plan, we will help you do that to the extent you need that help.
Great.
There are regional program managers that can assist.
And that's another great question leading into our next viewer question is when will the California regional offices be open?
So we're sort of in contract with an office in LA. So we're hoping to be opening that. We've already hired, I think we have 4 people down there, almost 5 that are kind of working remotely. We've identified a place in San Diego. So we're going through our Department of General Services to secure that. We have identified a place in Oakland. Can we say where it's at?
Laney
It's
College.
at Laney College. And so we're hiring there. So that's
Fresno.
Yeah. And Fresno as well. We've identified a place there. So
At
that's
Fresno
ready to go.
Community College.
So they're ready to open, and we're in the midst of hiring, hoping to have our whole team aboard by the end of the year.
And what we hope to do by the end of the year, beginning January 1, we'll post on the census website the list of who all the regional program managers are, what counties they have been assigned, as well as what ACBO region they've been assigned, as well as what sectors that they will also be working with. So we'll have all that information out there posted online by the end of the calendar year so that you'll know who your direct regional program manager contact is.
Great. I know a lot of boards of supervisors are taking up resolutions, and of course we'll be looking at the strategic plans will be submitted, so it'll be great to have that list of contacts when those start moving forward. And then another question that came in is who can be contacted if you have questions about the percentages that have been allocated to the cities? I don't
So we have our own expert with in-house, and we will, through you guys, we'll send out his the contact information. It's more of a generic email, but it'll go to him so that he can provide any information in terms of the split out. So if you were just for easy math here, if it shows that 50% was in the city and 50% was in the county, we can tell you which percents are in which cities. We have all that information, and we're happy to share it with you if you so desire to have that, and we'll provide you with the contact information to send out to folks.
Great, and I'll actually use this opportunity to put in a plug. CSAC does have a listserv, and again, our county census project coordinator lead. So if you are in a county and assigned that role, we would love to have your information so that we can ensure all of this great information is going out to you in a timely manner. So move on to our next question. In reviewing the CBO, the community-based organization reporting requirements, has there been consideration to the challenges this may pose for smaller organizations?
So we're in the midst of creating our RFP as well as the criteria and the reporting requirements for the CBO. That'll be due out December 14th. And so there is some consideration. We do understand that there are organizations that the state may not meet certain funding requirements, but that's why we've been partnering for over the last year with foundations who are also working on the ground game. We're coordinating very closely with them, and sometimes they have a little bit more flexibility and are closer to the ground to actually take advantage of some of these very effective smaller organizations.
Okay, great. Another question about confidentiality and wondering what steps are being taken or what is already underway to ensure the confidentiality of responses or protecting those who are maybe non-respondents.
So again, it's the US Census Bureau's decennial operation. They are doing as much as they can in terms of cybersecurity for the online response tool, and also Title 13 protects your data in terms of the federal title, in terms of federal government employees taking your data on. So at the US Census Bureau level, we are, since they're doing the data collection, we are definitely focused on making sure that there are no holes in that confidentiality.
Great, and that leads nicely into our next question about how the state of California and the U.S. Census Bureau are working directly to maximize resources and align strategies.
So I just recently finished a 6-year term as the chair of the National Advisory Committee to the U.S. Census Bureau on race, ethnicities, and other populations. So I've been working with them very closely over the last 6 years, and will continue even though I'm termed out there. And we have very close relationships both with headquarters as well as our regional partners here on the ground in California. They understand that California is very important, and they also understand that we're ahead of most other states in terms of our efforts, and so we have a really good relationship with them. We're all focused on the goal, which is to get a complete and accurate count. You know, obviously we're focused on California, and they know that if we get a better self-response rate here, 1% increased self-response rate in California saves them a lot of money in terms of people knocking on doors. So we are rounding up with them, and we have continued conversations and strategies to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and to make sure we're identifying those gaps where we can fill in better than they can, or they can fill in for us too.
Okay, great. Another question about the flow of funds, really important. How long after opting in and submitting the necessary strategic plan and paperwork will dollars start to flow out to the counties?
No, that's a great question. So I would just say, you know, we want it to flow out as soon as possible. Since it's a contract-based setup, there's deliverables in there, and it's all outlined in the document in terms of what percentage of funding you get based on every deliverable. Off the top of my head, I have to go back and check.
It's 10% for your resolution, so if you get that in, and then I think it's 35% for the strategic plan.
And you get the bulk upon the implementation plan, which is due at the end of the third quarter of 2019, and that's when the bulk of the funding comes, because obviously we want the bulk of the money spent in 2020 when we're actually conducting the outreach as the census is going on.
Right, and this is all captured, I believe, under Exhibit A in the attachments, which are combined in a nice PDF, one-stop shop there. So we have time for one or two more questions. Let's look through what the viewers out there have been patiently wanting us to respond to. Just to reiterate, the amount of time to opt in to accept the funding.
Sure. So we've provided basically 90 days where we hope that's enough time to allow you to go to your board of supervisors, have multiple conversations, and become informed on this topic, as well as giving the state enough time to reach out to you should you have questions and we need to come visit and have a conversation with you. But as mentioned earlier, to the extent there's extenuating circumstances, we will consider on a case-by-case basis extending the deadline for those counties that may need additional time. Our goal at the end of the day, just to reiterate, is to make sure that every county has the opportunity to participate in the census outreach. This is critical to all counties in the state, and we want you all to participate, and therefore we are going to do our best to facilitate that in one way or another.
Okay, great. And then a question now about hard-to-count communities. Are the county HTC hard-to-count communities and least likely respond areas required to be those identified by the new California hard-to-count index, or could also the Census Bureau's LRS measure be used when assigning those?
So the low responding score was really the basis of our new California hard-to-count index. The thing that they have a little bit of different variables. They're fairly close. We've added into our California hard-to-count index broadband subscription rates, which we think is key because, again, if they're going to be answering online. So you're not limited to doing outreach there. We believe that locals know where best. but some counties are more sophisticated in digging in deep, and so we know that there's certain counties that have already dug deep down into the LRS score. They're fairly close, so we're pretty flexible with where you spend it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both so much for your time and for everyone for tuning in for our webinar. And of course, we have all of this information and more online at the California Census website. And also CSAC has developed a portal for links to other resources, sample documents, and everything you may need to get started. So thank you all so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.